that Simpson boy is looking at 180 years.
Thank God we live in a country so hysterical over crime that a 10-year-old child can be tried as an adult.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 dark truths about the criminal justice system.
My darkest memory would be seeing so many people that I got to know be executed.
For this list, we'll be looking at facts and statistics about the U.S. justice system that may shake your faith in law and order. There are too many realities to cover in just 10 entries, so please contribute to the conversation in the comments below. Number 10. Prison is expensive.
What do you want?
Full physical rehab for Stanton at the prison's expense, and a guarantee that he'll be assigned light-duty tasks.
American taxpayers spend $80 billion a year to keep people in prison. On average, imprisonment costs around $31,000 per convict per year. Advocates for criminal justice reform have pointed out that in many states, that's far more than goes into public education. California, for example, pays $50,000 more per convict than per student. The fact that the U.S. has one of the highest rates of recidivism in the world raises further questions about how that money is spent. 3 out of 4 prisoners are rearrested within 5 years.
Repeat offender.
Not a pretty name, is it, Hi?
No, sir. That's one bonehead name, but that ain't me anymore.
Compare that to a rate of 20% in Norway, where the prison system is designed around rehabilitation and reintegration.
We take the freedom from them, but when they are here, we try to help them to get a better citizens.
Number 9. Violence is common. The data we have on violence in prisons is incomplete due to a code of silence among inmates. As the saying goes, snitches get stitches. What we do know is that 1 in 5 prisoners say they've been assaulted by a fellow inmate. Roughly the same number report violence from prison staff. Overcrowding increases rates of violence. Sexual assault is also a major problem. Figures vary, but in 2008 it was estimated that 216,000 inmates were sexually assaulted. In the last 2 decades, the rate of people taking their own lives in state prisons has almost doubled, and the homicide rate has tripled. Drug overdose rates are 7 times higher. For many inmates, the violent conditions in prison make rehabilitation an unlikely goal. Number 8. Punishing the innocent. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Prisons contain far too many innocent people.
Everybody's innocent in here. Don't you know that?
According to non-profit organization The Innocence Project, if we extrapolate the number of DNA exonerations to the total population, 1% of all prisoners are innocent. That's more than 20,000 people.
20 years, 9 months, 5 days in prison for a crime I didn't commit.
The system failed us, tremendously.
Other studies indicate as many as 6% of inmates are not guilty. That's upwards of 115,000 people, roughly the same population as Springfield, Illinois.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Villegas, not guilty of...
Race, too, plays a role here. For example, Black people are far more likely to be wrongfully convicted than white people. Number 7. Release can be a Kafkaesque nightmare. Around 95% of inmates will eventually be released. That doesn't end their troubles, however.
Hey, if I don't see you again, I'm coming home, I've done my time.
Former felons face considerable obstacles to making a fresh start, including restrictions on housing, civic participation, and employment.
Yeah, I was very, very hurt when I saw the neighborhood that the halfway house was in, because it was the neighborhood that I bought heroin in.
Many are denied housing or return home only for their families to be evicted. Once you leave prison, you're 10 times more likely to be homeless than the average American.
Mr. Brantley, you could just read, had a long history of opiate addiction. And if you're in this business long enough, you know the chances are at some point it will rear its ugly head.
As for employment, it's one of the most common conditions of parole, but 7 out of 8 employers won't hire ex-felons. Over a quarter are unemployed, feeding into recidivism.
Came back in 2002, got out in 2003, came back in 2005. The list goes on and on and on.
Even though there are 3 times as many former prisoners as current prisoners, states spend 10 times more on prisons than on parole, so resources are limited.
Sometimes I do it just to go back to jail, because it's easier to live.
Number 6. Trials are going extinct. From Perry Mason to Law and Order, dramatic courtroom moments are a staple of American television.
You were denied bail, but you got a real attorney, instead of a public defender.
Most people would be shocked to learn that very few cases ever reach a courtroom. The U.S. faces a major public defender crisis, made worse after the COVID-19 pandemic. While Americans technically have a right to representation, that doesn't always pan out. The threat of long prison sentences and large legal fees scare many people into just taking plea deals.
A little advice? Take a plea deal. I've seen the confession. It ain't good.
94% of convictions at the state level and 97% at the federal level come from plea deals, not from trials. Number 5, children in lockup. Tried as an adult is a phrase that has become normalized in the U.S. to a startling degree. In 22 states and Washington, D.C., children can be tried as an adult as young as age 7.
I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that you're tried as an adult.
Good luck.
According to Human Rights Watch, U.S. prisons contain more than 2,500 minors locked up for life without parole. There are around 10,000 children incarcerated in adult prisons. There are another 34,000 imprisoned in youth facilities. 1 in 5 aren't guilty of crimes.
Placement is, I had the adults there to help me, and I can make a better life for myself. There's schooling, there's a lot more activities there.
They're locked up for offenses like truancy and incorrigibility. What is incorrigibility? Disobeying their parents one too many times.
My dad had gotten in an argument, and I told him I was going to stay at a friend's house. And I took the car, and my dad went out to go in the car, and the car wasn't there, and he reported it stolen. But I think he knew I took it.
There are a further 20,000 kids in residential facilities waiting for prison beds to open up for them. Number 4, capital punishment. The controversies around capital punishment have led most countries to abolish it.
Do you have any last words, Consulate?
Yes, I do.
The United States is one of the holdouts, along with countries such as China, Iran, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Indonesia, Singapore, Taiwan, and Japan. One problem is that some executed inmates are likely innocent.
The verdict was guilty, and Fain was to pay with his life. But now the marvels of modern science have turned it all around, and may turn Fain loose.
The exact number is uncertain, but at least 190 death row inmates have been exonerated since 1973.
For 30 years, Anthony Ray Hinton was a dead man walking.
Thank you, Jesus! Thank you, Lord!
But not now.
Another is that executions are botched. In 2022, a third of executions were mishandled, according to the Death Penalty Information Center. One executioner in Alabama took 3 hours to find a vein. There's also continued debate over whether lethal injection is painful. Drug companies are trying to pull their drugs from execution protocols, leaving states to find new drugs with little transparency.
In the case of Joseph Wood, using an experimental drug combination that was going to fail. We knew that. We told the state that, but yet they forged ahead.
Number 3, crime and poverty. Advocates for criminal justice reform have highlighted the link between poverty and crime for years. Almost 40% of people in state prison were jobless the month before getting arrested. A majority of women in prison were jobless in that same time frame. The struggle doesn't end at arrest and isn't limited to the prisoners themselves.
He even says himself, as soon as he bonds out, he's going to come right back.
1/3 of families of inmates go into debt for visitation and phone calls. 2/3 of families of inmates can't meet their own basic needs. In the U.S., there's a widespread practice called pay to stay. Many jails across the country charge inmates a daily fee while they are in holding.
Pay-as-you-go jail in Fremont is $155 a night, the cost of a 3-star hotel.
Well, you do get cable TV, but you don't get a warm cookie on your bed.
That often leads to massive debt on top of their everyday struggles. Number 2, the prison capital of the world.
I'm representing a man who's a 75-year-old disabled combat veteran who was found to have 2.5 pounds of pot because he was using it to deal with stent in his heart.
The United States makes up just 4.25% of the world's total population, yet it has 22% of the world's prisoners. There are around 2 million incarcerated Americans. Based on 2020 census data, that's almost 7 out of every 1,000 people. If the prison population were a state, it would rank 36th in total population. Despite a huge drop in violent crime over the last 40 years, the number of people incarcerated has surged by 500%, an increase largely linked to the war on drugs.
And because he had convictions from 30 years ago in Alabama, the judge had to impose a mandatory life without parole sentence on this.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications. Number 1. Racism. The criminal justice system is the poster child for systemic racism in the U.S. People of color are imprisoned at a widely disproportionate rate.
He is scaring my son.
How? Because I'm black? Listen, officers, I'm out here minding my own business.
1/3 of black males and 1/6 of Latino males born today will likely go to prison. Compare that to 1 out of 17 white males. This difference is reflected in the war on drugs. White and black people use and sell drugs at similar rates, although white people are somewhat more likely to sell. Yet, black people are far more likely to be arrested for drug offenses. In fact, 1/3 of people imprisoned on drug charges are black.
See that? If there's one thing this country's good at, it's incarcerating black males.
When it comes to sentencing, it's more bad news. Black men receive 19% longer sentences than white men who commit the same offense.